So I've entitled my talk this morning, How Long is a Piece of String? And I think if you were to Google that as an expression, you would get a definition that was something like this. It means that the quantitative answer is difficult to come by, it's not known, and given the information that we have available, it's going to be difficult to come by. And by my experience, I think that that's a pretty good definition of what it's like to do software estimation. I'd like to start with a simple exercise for us to sort of think about. So imagine we were to take a deck of playing cards, 52 cards. Now with this deck, we were going to split them in two and put one part face down on the table and another part face up. Now we're going to mix them up. Now, if I were to ask you to estimate in seconds how long it would take to do the following, what would you say? So first of all, I want you to sort the cards face up into their suits. And secondly, to do the same exercise, but to put all the cards in the suits in numerical order. Well, I'm a little bit intrigued, so how long would people estimate to do the first task? Just shout out some numbers. A minute? Yeah? People are nodding. A minute. Any others? Nobody else? Yeah? 2 minutes. Okay. What about the second one? A little bit more difficult? 1 more minute, 2 more minutes, 5 minutes. Okay. Well, why is there such a range? Why? We're all very familiar with cards. We're all very familiar with sorting things. But we've seen a real range in those sort of estimates. Well, maybe you could, and if we were to do a project with this, well, which value would we go for? Well, you might like to go home tonight and try out and sort of see how accurate your estimates sort of really are. It's hard sometimes to work out how long it's going to take to do something, isn't it? And we have this situation a lot of time when we're doing sort of software development. We're given a problem to solve, it may be a feature to develop, and we're asked to estimate how long it's going to take. Well, I want to tell you a story born out of very painful experience. A software company had signed a contract with a blue ribbon client, and this was to take the product in a totally new and exciting direction and open up very many possibilities for the future. At the beginning, a scoping exercise was taken and a number of epics were defined, and these were taken to the software team. We need you to size these. Rough estimates are fine for now, but we need them by the end of the week. Well, after the protestations had died down about the lack of time, the lack of information, and the fact that this was in a technology that nobody was very familiar with, the team did their best and came up with an estimate range of 6 to 12 months. That's no good, came the response from the CTO. We need it done by the end of the year, but okay, because of the uncertainty, I'll give you an extra 4 people. Well, 4 people would be great, but what about the time it was going to take to recruit and to train? And by that point, the company had, amidst great fanfare, announced to the whole world that the product was going to be delivered on the 31st of December. Just a side note to anybody involved here in project management, that's clearly a bad date to set, let alone it was without the software team's agreement. I probably don't need to complete the rest of the story. You could probably work it out for yourself. Actually, the product was delivered in some form by the end of the year, but it involved very many people working many weekends and over Christmas in order to achieve this. Plus, it dragged in people from other projects, impacting them too. The longer-term ramifications were more severe. Over the next 6 months, most of that software team left the organization. And relationships between the product and tech teams broke down so much that, well, when any subsequent estimates were asked for, well, the developers would just massively inflate them because they didn't want to be in that situation again. And the product team, well, they would view suspiciously any estimate that came their way. I expect most of you will have your own version of that story, probably with very similar outcomes. Software estimation is hard. I know that. You know that. But maybe other people in your business don't necessarily know that. The CEO, for example, they just want to know when they're going to get something. And we just go along with it, well, because they're the CEO. So we create a raft of different ways of trying to estimate them more accurately. For example, we might do some of the following. We'll use our expert estimators, our principal developer, or our technical lead. Of course, the challenge with that is that they're not always the people that are going to sort of do the work. We might count things, use cases, stories, features, and multiply them by a common factor. So let's say we know that there's 10 stories in this particular feature. We roughly do a story a week. Well, okay, we know it's going to take us 10 weeks, don't we? We might compare with similar historical projects. Oh, we've done something like this before, haven't we? But do we really remember that project in detail? And how similar can two software projects really be? We might use ranges to encapsulate our uncertainty. But that's fine, but depending on your sort of personality type, you might fixate on one end or the other of the range. How long is it going to take? 3 to 6 months. You can do it in 3 months. No, I didn't say that. Oh, we'll go with our gut feel. Oh, I've done this before. I know what this is. That's just a couple of months. Or it's just a one-line fix. How hard can it be? We may just pad the estimates, or we'll just double it to be safe. We might use T-shirt sizing, small, medium, large, extra, extra large. And Agile Scrum brought us familiar with story pointing as a way to sort of abstract the time it was going to take to do something. But you know somewhere in the background somebody's converting those story points to days, weeks, months. If we're really keen, we can do Monte Carlo simulations. At the extreme end of the scale, there are things like this, and there are complex formulaic ways of determining software estimates from a series of input parameters. I like this one. This is the Kokomo 2 model, and it takes over 20 different input parameters and spits out a software estimate. At the end, it takes parameters such as programmer capability, process maturity, the language you're trying to use, and even team cohesion, if you could put a value against that. Well, we try all these things, and what happens? Well, we still get it wrong, don't we? Well, maybe that's just because of Hofstadter's law. Well, it was out of this that the no estimates movement started some time ago. The premise was simple. Software estimation is hard. We've tried many different ways, and we're still getting it wrong. And lean methodology tells us to eliminate waste. And if software estimation has no value, well, the time spent trying to do it would be better spent writing the software we're trying to estimate. A colleague of mine had a team was very diligent in producing software estimates, but inevitably at the end of some of the sprints, they were out. Cue the worst sprint review you could imagine. You see, their product owner was a former lawyer, and they wanted to know why every 3-point story that had become a 5-point story was so. So this technical lead used to spend hours coming up with all the mitigating factors why that had happened. It was just a waste of time. So I have a lot of sympathy with the no estimates line of reasoning because of situations like that. And I'm sure you've been in that same situation where you've been in a meeting, you've been given some really sketchy requirements, and you're asked to come up with this high-level estimate. Well, we protest, we caveat the life out of them, but what happens? Those estimates just become a reality. Now who loses out? But without estimates, project managers couldn't produce Gantt charts. And where would we be without those? No, seriously, I believe there are times when we need to give an indication to the business on how long something is going to take so that they can make relevant decisions on how to prioritize things. So software estimates are hard, we know that. The no estimates way is tempting, but is there a third way? Well, I believe there is. And having been involved in these type of situations many times as a development manager, I've come to understand that the key to solving the conundrum of software estimation is trust. For sure, we must use those estimation techniques that we've talked about earlier, but having trust trumps all of those things. Well, trust is obviously the key to any relationship. I think we'd all agree on that, and it's certainly true for the relationship between tech and product. Now, don't get me wrong here. I'm not sort of saying that we can throw everything else out that we've ever done out of the window, and we just need to base it on trust. But please don't go home to your sort of teams or your business and say, hey, went to UXDX, sort of talk on software estimation. The guy says we don't need to do any more of that. We just need to base it on trust. You know, peace out, man. No, I think we need to do all those good things, but we need to underpin it with the foundation of trust. Okay, he says trust, but what does he mean by that? Well, I can't define what trust will look like in your particular relationship, but what I want to do to leave you with is 5 things that can help build or maximize trust between the two teams. For each, I've got an underlying principle, and I'm going to look at what it might look like for both product and tech teams. Firstly, making and keeping commitments. For the tech teams that I manage, I want them to make the commitments they can, the ones that are knowable, the sprint commitments, and deliver on them. I also want them to give quality demos. For product teams, as far as possible, fix the scope. Push back on your stakeholders who are asking for more. It's really hard for a development team to stop midway through what they're doing because something's changed again. Of course, it's not always possible, but make it a key aim. Secondly, be transparent. Tech teams, if you don't make your sprint commitments for whatever reason, then be transparent. Don't hide behind tech speak. If you've had a shocker, just call it out. For product teams, there'll be times when the stories that you've written are ambiguous or have missed out some details. When you do that, just hold your hands up and say sorry. When we fail and we're open about it, it creates psychological safety, which is really great for our relationship. Thirdly, don't overdo things. I want you to understand and live out the commerciality of the business. What do I mean by that? I mean, a lot of us have to understand that we're in a business that's there to make a profit. Or if we work in a not-for-profit organization, create value for others. Tech teams, we don't help ourselves, do we, when we gild the lily, when we try to write that new feature in some funky new complex technologies just because we think it'll be fun. On the product side, work hard to go for MVP. Do you really need all those bells and whistles? I'm no product expert, but I see a real shift towards simplicity when we're thinking about sort of product and product design. So make this a goal. Fourthly, show empathy. Tech teams, your product teams inevitably have a lot of stakeholders who all want to know when something's going to be done. And they're in the difficult situation of having to convey delays without having any direct link to the software, influence over the software, not as much as you particularly may have. So also, I've heard stuff like this. Please don't say stuff like, I can't tell you how long it's going to take because we're doing agile, like it's some sort of magic veto card. Product teams, similarly, don't say things like, can't you do it quicker? Or, surely it can't take that long, you're only adding a button. Or, my other team did something very similar to that and it only took half the time. Don't be like that lawyer. Lastly, educate ourselves and our leaders on the complexity of software estimation. For example, use thought experiment analogies to try and convey the complexity. The one I like is, imagine how long it would take to add a cantilevered swimming pool between the 30th and the 31st floor of the shard. Because I think that's what we're doing with our software architecture sometime. Well, let's take a more tangible example. A while ago, I went on holiday with my wife to the island of Skye. And one day we decided to do a trip, and we went to a place called Lochcarrusk, and we knew that you could take a boat there, and that you could hike back along the coast. And it's a beautiful place, and if you're ever in that sort of area, I would really recommend it. Now imagine if we needed to work out how long that walk was going to take. What would we do? Well, we'd want to measure the distance. We'd want to understand how long the route is. And if we knew that we walked at a certain pace, then we could easily calculate how long it was going to take us. Well, say if we drew the lines on the map like that, it was looking like it was sort of 6 miles. We knew we walked at 3 miles an hour. Okay, so it's going to take us 2 hours. Of course, you can't just draw a line on the map, because that's not how paths work, particularly around the coast. What actually happens, you need to zoom in to understand exactly where the path goes. And interestingly, the more you zoom in, the more closer you get, the longer the path gets. And if at the sort of extreme level you zoom in, it gets infinitely long. It's known as the infinite coastline problem. But for now, imagine we were to zoom in and we find out that actually the route is 8.5 miles long, and now it's going to take us 3 hours, which is a 50% increase on our original estimate. However, when you get on the route, you discover a few obstacles. You discover something like this. What this is about a mile into the journey, is something called the bad step. And what actually happens is that the path stops and then continues along a rock face. And what you have to do is sort of like crawl along it like this. And actually, when we got there, my wife just refused to go across. She was like, I'm not going to do this. But we didn't really have an alternative, because actually the boat that had taken us out there had returned. And the only other route was to retrace our steps and to sort of walk 9 miles the other way and then take a bus back to the beginning. And both options meant that we were going to be about 75 or 300% off our original estimate. And this is how it is with software projects, isn't it? At the beginning, we're given those high-level requirements, walk from A to B. We might decide to do a spike. We might decide to zoom in closer to inspect the route to see how long it's actually going to take. But there's always going to be those obstacles, those bad steps that we couldn't have predicted at all until we were right on top of them. When we're at that point, we have to take either additional time to get across them, or we have to retrace our steps and go in a different direction. So there you go. And one final warning on trust, and it's something that we all know. Trust isn't something that's easy to develop, something that we can just switch on. And in our journey there, it may be tempting to revert to rely solely on those old estimation techniques. But we really should resist. Why? Because solving the conundrum of software estimation isn't just an academic exercise, one that makes us look good if we get it right. No, it's because it clearly impacts people's lives significantly. Those people who are up late at night coming up with all those mitigating reasons in order to appease their product owner. Those people who are working many weekends and over Christmas because of an underestimated project. It can, and it does, affect people's relationships and well-being. It's serious stuff, so let's all try and get better at it. Thank you.